I found out my mother had died from a Facebook post. Not a phone call. Not a text. A post from my cousin Danielle 3 days after the funeral captioned, "Rest easy, Aunt Carol. We'll take care of everything." Underneath it, 42 comments from relatives I hadn't seen in a decade, all of them apparently informed enough to attend a service I'd never been told about. My name is Mara Voss. I live in Portland, Oregon. My mother, Carol Ridgway, lived in Charleston, South Carolina, 3,000 miles and, as it turned out, one carefully engineered estrangement away from me. We'd been estranged for 6 years, not from any single explosive fight, but from a slow erosion that started after my father died and my mother remarried a man named Preston Kellerman, a real estate developer with a smile like a car salesman and an opinion about every decision I'd ever made. Preston didn't like me. I didn't like Preston. My mother, caught between us, chose the path of least resistance, which over time became the path of least contact. I called it estrangement. I now know my stepbrother, Cal Kellerman, called it opportunity. I flew to Charleston within 24 hours of seeing that post. I stood in the driveway of a house I didn't recognize. My mother had moved twice since we'd last spoken, and rang the doorbell like a stranger. Preston answered. "Mara," he said like he'd practiced being unsurprised. "This isn't a good time. You buried my mother without calling me." "We tried reaching you," he said, which I later learned was a lie so thin it barely qualified as one. They'd sent a single email to an address I hadn't used since 2019. What Preston didn't know, standing in that doorway trying to block me from stepping inside my own mother's house, was that I'd already spent the flight doing something he never expected. I'd searched my mother's name alongside the word probate, out of nothing but grief-fueled instinct, and found a filing in the Charleston County court system from 4 days earlier. Estate value, approximately $50.4 million. I stood in that doorway and felt the ground actually tilt. My mother, who I remembered clipping coupons and driving a 14-year-old Camry, had died worth $50 million, and no one in that house had thought to mention it, let alone invite me to say goodbye. What I learned over the following weeks, piece by piece, from a Charleston probate attorney named Renee Okafor whom I hired the day after that doorstep conversation, was this. My mother hadn't gotten rich off Preston's real estate deals as I'd assumed. She'd gotten rich on her own, quietly, over 15 years, through a chain of medical staffing agencies she'd built from a single home health company she started after my father's death. The same years I thought she was drifting into a smaller, sadder life with a man I didn't respect. She'd sold 2 of the agencies for eye-watering sums, reinvested in commercial property along the coast, and never told me a word of it, possibly because Preston had convinced her that discussing money with her difficult daughter would only invite conflict. Renee also found something else. A will, dated 14 months before my mother's death, on file with a Charleston notary. It left 80% of the estate to Preston and Cal jointly. 15% to a scattering of Kellerman grandchildren I'd never met. 5%, 5, to me with a line that read, "In the hope that she finds peace apart from this family as she seems to have chosen." I didn't believe my mother wrote that sentence. Not because I wanted to believe otherwise out of grief, but because I remembered her handwriting, her voice, the specific way she apologized for things even when she thought she was right. That sentence wasn't an apology. It was a eulogy for a relationship written by someone who'd never actually loved me. Renee found the crack in the case within 3 weeks. My mother's longtime personal attorney, not the notary who'd handled the contested will, but her actual estate lawyer of 20 years, a man named Arthur Pemberton in Mount Pleasant, hadn't been the one to draft that final document. Preston had switched attorneys 8 months before my mother's death, moving her file to a small firm that, it turned out, Cal's college roommate ran. Pemberton still had my mother's older will on file from 3 years prior, splitting the estate 50-50 between me and any children Preston might name as beneficiaries. A will she'd never formally revoked in writing, only updated, according to Preston verbally. And then Pemberton told Renee something that changed everything. My mother had visited his office 6 weeks before she died, alone without Preston, which she'd never done in the 2 decades he'd known her. She told him she was worried about pressure from her husband and stepson to change her estate plans, and she'd asked him to record their conversation, in case anyone ever tries to say I didn't know my own mind. The recording still existed. In it, my mother's voice, tired but entirely lucid, described exactly what she wanted. the medical staffing companies and coastal properties held in trust, split evenly between me and Cal, with Preston receiving a fixed sum and no control over the trust itself. She specifically said on tape, "I don't want Preston deciding what my daughter gets. That's not his decision to make." It never was. She died of a sudden stroke 5 weeks after that recording, before she could formally execute the new will. Pemberton had begun drafting, which meant under South Carolina law, the last validly executed document was still the contested one Preston's firm had produced. The recording alone couldn't overturn a signed will. But it could support something else. A claim of undue influence. The case took 11 months. Renee built it methodically. The switched law firm, the isolated signing, no independent witness present besides Cal and a notary who turned out to be Cal's co-worker. The recorded statement of intent from 6 weeks prior showing my mother's actual wishes, and financial records showing Preston had taken out a $2 million loan against estate assets in the 2 months before her death, an act that would have required her sign-off unless he'd been managing her affairs more unilaterally than anyone admitted. The judge didn't throw out the will entirely, but ordered a settlement that effectively rewrote it. The coastal properties and staffing agencies placed in trust, split 50-50 between me and Cal, with Preston receiving a lump sum and removed as trustee. Cal, to his credit, or perhaps just his self-preservation, didn't fight the settlement once the loan discrepancy surfaced. I think some part of him also hadn't fully trusted his father either. I keep the recording of my mother's voice saved in 3 different places now, the way people keep things they're terrified of losing twice. I play it sometimes not to relive the case, but to hear her say my name the way she used to before Preston, before the silence, before I found out about her death from a stranger's comment section. That's not his decision to make. It never was. He was talking about money. But I think somewhere underneath it she was talking about us too, about the fact that no one, not a husband, not a stepson, not 6 years of quiet distance, ever actually got to decide how much she loved me. I just wish she'd told me herself while she still could.